Good evening, everybody. That was terrible. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Stateside at the Paramount Theater. I'm Larry Schooler from the city of Austin. You know, we are about to embark on an historic journey to a new era in land development. And like any journey, we should probably expect the unexpected. We will probably discover things that we didn't know. We will probably hear from people who had not previously spoken up, and we will probably find challenges in bringing the Imagine Austin vision to reality. But the amazing thing about the journey that we're embarking on tonight is that we're actually embarking on it together. No city in America, or maybe even the world, has placed the same amount of emphasis on community engagement as the city of Austin has. And this journey is only going to succeed if neighborhood associations, real estate organizations, environmental advocates, affordable housing providers, and the entire community all come along. We know it's never easy to satisfy everyone. What may look like progress to one person may look like an unwanted change in the character of a neighborhood to another. What may seem like protection for the environment to one person may seem like a catalyst for sprawl to another person. But this much is clear. When a diverse array of Austinites participates in the conversation, makes their core values and interests known, and does the difficult work of looking for consensus, amazing things happen. In fact, Austin happens. And we all know how great our city is. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn from other cities, which is what tonight is all about. We invite you to absorb the lessons offered by cities who have taken this journey and to consider the ramifications of those lessons for our city. We want you to do more than just sit back and relax tonight. We want you to engage in the conversation. We wouldn't be having this conversation if it were not thanks to some generous sponsor support from the Stateside at the Paramount, from Congress for New Urbanism Central Texas, from the American Institute of Architects, from the Real Estate Council of Austin, from the Austin Board of Realtors, from the Urban Land Institute, from the Downtown Austin Alliance, and from the Home Builders Association of Greater Austin. Would you all join me in thanking them? We've also, for the Land Development Code process, assembled a very brave group of people to serve as members of an advisory group, and I'm told that Chris Bradford, Jim Duncan, and Dave Sullivan have all joined us tonight. There may be others. We also have from the Planning Commission, Gene Stevens, and I'm sure some other folks. We really appreciate the enormous public service that they give to our community purely as volunteers. Would you join me in thanking them for that? We got some guests in town. Let's treat them right, okay? Starting in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, Michael Slavney is a principal planning consultant at Vanderwall & Associates. Slavney chaired the Madison, Wisconsin Zoning Code Rewrite Advisory Committee, which was an 18-member stakeholder group during a 4-year zoning revision process. The advisory committee reviewed the changes to the city zoning code and map, made recommendations to the Planning Commission, and managed community outreach. Mike has over 30 years of planning experience and has worked in more than 30 states and rewritten more than 30 zoning codes. God help him. In 2004, Slavney became a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, a peer-bestowed honor for individual planners who have made significant contributions to planning and society. He's also, I can tell, a proud father. Ladies and gentlemen, from Madison, Wisconsin, Mike Slavney. Sliding up to the top left-hand corner of your screen, Mitchell Silver is the Chief Planning and Development Officer and the Planning Director for the city of Raleigh, North Carolina. He's also President of the American Planning Association. Mitchell's an award-winning planner with over 27 years of experience, not quite 30, but getting close. He's internationally recognized for his leadership in the planning profession and contributions to contemporary planning issues. Mitchell previously worked as the Policy and Planning Director in New York City, a principal of a New York-based planning firm, and Deputy Planning Director in Washington, D.C. As Planning Director in Raleigh, he led the comprehensive plan update process to create a vibrant 21st century city. He's now overseeing a rewrite of the city's development code. Mitchell is a contributing editor and author of ICMA's Local Planning, Contemporary Principles and Practice, and he's been widely quoted in mass media. Ladies and gentlemen, from Raleigh, Mitchell Silver. From a little town a wee north of here, Veletta, Forsythe, Lill, a longtime advocate of the arts, historic preservation, and urban planning who served on the Dallas City Council from 1997 to 2005. She was appointed by the mayor as chair of the Comprehensive Plan Committee and charged with laying the policy groundwork for the Forward Dallas Plan. I'm sorry, that's Forward Dallas with an exclamation point on the end. Defining Dallas's future development vision. Area plans such as Downtown Dallas 360 have led to the modification of street and food truck vending codes, the creation of pop-up retail, and the construction of multimodal infrastructure to link surrounding neighborhoods and create lively spaces. She's been honored with numerous awards, including the Distinguished Elected Official Award from the American Planning Association, honorary membership in the Texas Society of Architects, and the Legends Award from the Dallas Center of Contemporary Art. From Dallas, be nice, Veletta, Forsythe, Lill. And last but obviously not least, Tina Axelrod is a principal city planner with the City and County of Denver. Major projects she's managed or participated in while with Denver include the Comprehensive Denver Zoning Code update, successfully adopted in 2010, preparation of the General Development Plan for 9th and Colorado redevelopment, and numerous zoning map and text amendments. Ms. Axelrod was a principal prior to that with Clarion Associates, where she worked on numerous zoning and development code updates, design standards and guidelines, process streamlining, and redevelopment plans. Also a proud mother of 3 boys, Tina Axelrod. Axelrod. We're about to move to Roman numeral 2, which is our panelist presentations. We've asked our panelists to give you all a brief overview of the dynamics at play in their city. Then I'm going to ask a set of questions that come off of those presentations, as well as some questions that were provided to me ahead of time. We're going to enable you to ask questions as well, and I'll get to how you do that in just a second. At the very end, we're also going to ask for your feedback, some of what you may have taken from the presentation and how you might think it's relevant to what the City of Austin is about to undertake. And then we'll have some closing remarks. These are our standard discussion agreements for any City of Austin event: open-mindedness, acceptance, curiosity, discovery, sincerity, and brevity, and we ask that you follow those. So there are 3 different ways that you can ask questions tonight. There will be index cards provided to you if they haven't been already, and if you have a question you'd like to write down on the card, you can do so, and then staff members will be coming down the aisles to collect them. You can also text your question. If you text the phrase "question time," no spaces, and then the question to the phone number 22333, we'll get that question, and we'll do our best to answer it. So again, you send a text to the phone number 22333 with the phrase "question time," no spaces, and then your question if you'd like to do that. Or at the end, we'll also allow people to line up here at the microphone to ask questions after we get through the first couple of parts. So, I believe we're ready to begin in the Tar Heel State with Mitchell Silver.
Thank you. I like to tell a joke, but I'm going to honor the brevity part, so I'm going to keep to moving very quickly through my presentation. Well, first, good evening, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk very briefly about Raleigh, North Carolina. It is the capital of North Carolina, and like your region, it's one of the fastest growing metropolitan regions over the past 10 years and will continue to be going forward. We are a knowledge-based economy very similar to yours, and I'm going to share with you what we went through very recently. And I am very proud and honored to say that our development code was actually passed last Monday on February 18, 2013. We were able to get both our plan and our code done in 5 years. Well, let me just tell you about how that was done. First, let me talk about some of the, Let me talk about some of the project objectives. For us, first, it was getting that plan done. Our comp plan set the vision and values for where we wanted to move as a community, and then that set up the code, how we code to get to that vision and values. For us, we wanted to fight all those tough battles during the planning process so it would make the coding process a lot easier. We knew all the hot topics in advance, and we came up with a list of about 120 zoning items that we handed over to our consultant. Our concern and our goal was to address market trends. We wanted to make sure we had a code that was unique to Raleigh. It was a context-based code, but it was very important that the context fit our code. We wanted to have the right rules in the right places. Urban rules in urban places and suburban rules in suburban places. For us, forming character was very important. Our new code has no commercial districts. It is residential, mixed use, and then we had our special districts. This allowed the flexibility over time, and we made sure there were certain uses that are not incompatible next to one another, but that was a huge departure from our previous code. Transit played a big role in our comprehensive plan. It helped define our land use. And so when we moved to our coding process, we knew exactly those places that was going to get the high density, and then the neighborhoods that would remain low density and be protected, and I'll show you a slide in a second. We also wanted to increase predictability. We did not want residents and neighbors to come down to council meeting or planning commission meetings on a regular basis to fight the same battles again and again. We want our rules to be fair, to be clear for both the developers and the neighbors so that they understood what were the rules of the game, so that would make the process move a lot faster and quicker. And then finally, we wanted to make it easy to do the right thing. We always talk about what we wanted to see. We want to see infill development or development downtown, but it was the most difficult development to do. It was easier to build out in the fringe where there were less rules, and we wanted to make sure we would change that approach. Some of the other factors, as I stated, is that we identified some of those key zoning issues up front during the comprehensive planning process. I cannot tell you how helpful that was for us, and so we knew exactly what were the hot topics, and we continue to have that conversation with our residents. We developed a future land use map. We actually did a land capacity study, so we knew exactly whether our roads had to have additional capacity for sewer, for water, but more importantly, where we needed transit, and again, I will show you that shortly. The future land use map also gave us a clue on the districts we would be coding going forward. We did not want to give the public any surprises. We talked about those hot topics up front. We undertook a diagnostic report to make sure we understood what was wrong with our code, just like going to a doctor. We realized sometimes the code can get a little bit heavy and we got to put our code on a diet. So we identified those areas where we had to actually address some of the critical things in our existing code. As I stated, in terms of the residential districts, we decided up front that we will not make any changes to our residential districts. And that was important because a lot of the neighbors felt, or neighborhoods felt, what are you going to do to my neighborhood? We kept the zoning basically intact. So for R10 or 10 units to the acre and below, there's going to be no change or some marginal change. We just focused on about 35% of the city where we expected change to occur. Some of the other factors, which were big hot topics for us, tree protection is a big issue in North Carolina and especially in Raleigh. We wanted to balance that tree conservation with walkable urbanism. Transitions from neighborhood to commercial and higher density was a huge issue. We were able to identify that problem, and so now we have rules in place that require transitions between higher density and commercial for every project. So once again, neighbors do not have to come down to City Hall time and time again to fight those battles. The rules are up front and they're clear. And in fact, this got huge support from all the neighborhoods because their main concern was be protected about some of the development and traffic that was coming their way. The other issue was density and form. We actually focus a lot on infrastructure sufficiency. We wanted to make sure for each project, we now have a checklist if a project comes in, that there's the infrastructure in place to handle the growth. Water, sewer, traffic, all those are now built into every review so that we now know up front if a project's coming in actually has the capacity sufficient to handle that project. And then we actually recalibrated our public realm and have a new set of street typology. No more roads driven by transportation engineers who wanted streets for people, for cars, for bikes, to have it more multimodal. So just to show you what that looks like, you're looking at our growth framework map. This is a simplified version of our land use map. We wanted to identify 8 growth centers and corridors where we would put the expected 120,000 households we're expecting over the next 20 years and 170,000 jobs. We decided to direct all of it, 60 to 70%, to these 8 growth centers you see in the dark colors, and then along our transit line, which you see in those purple dots. The highlighted corridors would be either streetcar, or it would be bus, BRT, or light rail. There is no way we could achieve that level of density and maintain our quality of life without transit. It was not going to happen. And so we dealt with that up front in our plan, and then our code reflected that in higher densities around TODs. And then this was a crucial map. The areas you see highlighted in pink, these were the areas that we were going to see the land rezoned. We're now in the process of remapping the entire city. Everything in yellow is going to be remapped. Everything that is not in yellow are our residential areas, our neighborhoods. There will not be a lot of change. And so we're going to focus on the areas where we know provide the most land value, the most redevelopment, which will give us the equity to help build a great city. Vision and values, and then we code for those vision and values, and now we're moving forward with mapping, and all of these, the public now understands the neighborhoods will be protected, and they now know where development will occur, and that's the predictable part. So with that, I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, and I thank you and I welcome your questions. Thank you very much.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
Oh, good idea.
I'm Tina Axelrad. I'm a principal city planner with Denver. It's 7:22. I have to be off of here, I know, later than 7:32, I've been told. I'm a city planner and also a lawyer, which sometimes turns people off, but in terms of talking about zoning, it actually comes in handy because the code is a legal document as well as an implementation tool for our plans. It's where the rubber hits the road, and a lot of people actually start getting interested in land use and development when you're talking about zoning and property rights. And it helps to have all flavors of folks involved, from lawyers to planners to architects to designers to business people to residents. And it helps to have people on both sides of the table working for the city and from the community who know those disciplines very well. I don't know why I went that way, but anyway, let me get back to Denver. City like yours, a capital city, population about 620,000. Our metro area is inching close to 2.9 million. Denver is the regional center. It's the head of state government. It's the cultural, entertainment, and sports venue center of the region. It's got most of the institutions of higher learning in the metro area. And we, as a region, have invested heavily in rail and transit. This has been in place for over a decade already, and as you might know, our system is about to grow more than twofold over the next 10 to 15 years in terms of light rail and commuter rail lines. The zoning code update, of which I played a role for a good portion of my time in Denver, I was project manager. About 2 years into the project, I became project manager when I joined the city. And it took us 5 years total to get the zoning code written and adopted. The code is similar to Raleigh's and other communities you'll hear from tonight, based on plan direction. It's always a lot easier to write a code if you've got a good plan in place pointing you in the right direction. The plan is your roadmap. The code is just a tool to help you get to your destination. And Denver had the luxury of having 2 very good plans on the book, a comprehensive plan and a specific land use and transportation plan to help guide the zoning. The plan set up a similar growth management strategy for the city. It told us generally where growth needed to occur, where it should be directed. It was where our transportation infrastructure already existed or would be in the future with all this transit investment. It was where we had the streets and the water and the infrastructure in place to take on additional density. Those were called our areas of change. Those typically ran along major roadway corridors. Our Colfax, maybe you've heard of that, and some of our main streets. Other areas that were areas of change are our redeveloping areas. We have, like you have your Miller Field, we had Lowry Air Force Base, and we had Stapleton Airport, both major infill redevelopment opportunities for the city of Denver. In addition, we had the lands around the airport as more of a green field or new place for development to occur. Those are our areas of change. The rest of the city, the majority of the city, are our stable residential neighborhoods and commercial areas that serve those neighborhoods. And so our plan gave us good direction as to what change over the next 20 years should look like in both those places. So our code took a very similar approach to Raleigh's in terms of recognizing that the city of Denver was comprised of a lot of different places with different characters and different patterns of development. And it was silly to expect the same set of zoning rules to give optimal results in all these different places. But yet that's what our code expected. It was a 1956 code, a very 50s, 60s mentality of everything should be torn down and rebuilt. And it was so out of sync with our plans, which were 21st century plans. So our code is set up to recognize that there should be zoning rules that are different for our more suburban areas than for our more urban neighborhoods. Even though they might be both primarily single family, there were different patterns. There was more open space and greater setbacks in the suburban neighborhoods and larger lots. The streets were curvy and the blocks were odd-shaped and the lots were sometimes pie-shaped. And what does zoning look like on those? Very different than when you're on a grid pattern, rectangular blocks. The lots are less wide than they are deep, and you need kind of a different set of rules to help build something that fits in that type of context versus the suburban context. So that's what we set up in our code. It's worked really great to give us a framework to continue to improve and build and recognize new issues. Our code is also form-based in that we put greater imbalance in what we regulate. It used to just be all about uses. The way to distinguish the city in one zone district from another was just different uses in different places and what was allowed and not allowed. Now we can distinguish based on the type of form or pattern of buildings we want. That's what form-based is. We can say in a suburban commercial corridor, your buildings can be further back from the street, and you can have parking between the street and the building, and you can have big shopping centers, and you can have residential neighborhoods that are not as mixed in. That's fine. We didn't have plan direction to make those places any different than what they were. But in our urban neighborhoods, there was direction to reinforce patterns that were pre-war, where buildings were pushed up to the street, where there was a lot of potential for walkability, where we had good transit. And you know what? When you've got those pieces, the zoning looks very different in what you want. You want the buildings pulled close to the street. You want doors on the street and facing the street. You want a lot of transparency at ground level so people walking can see in and out and it feels safer and makes that pedestrian experience richer. That's what our code now can do. That's context-based and form-based, and it's built a framework of discussion for the community when we now go out and do new plans, as well as really implement our long-term vision. Other issues and factors at play in our code update was a lot of emphasis on process streamlining. Why make this great new code and then create barriers to getting things approved that you want? So a lot of review and streamlining of process. We had references to 99 different procedures in our zoning code through a sort of just accumulation over the time. Every time someone came up with a bright new idea, we amended the code and twisted the process just enough to make it different from all the other processes on the book. It was ridiculous. We're now down to 13. Ease of use and organization of the material so that someone who doesn't look at the code every day, whether it's a homeowner just wanting to know, where can I put my addition on my house and how tall can it be and how far away from my neighbor do I have to be, can look at 2 pages in a code book and get all the answers in one place. That was huge. Before you had to flip, 20 different places to put the pieces together. So that was a major effort on our part just to make zoning more accessible to all types of users. And let's see. I think we'll get lots of questions about public participation and communications about the plan. That's obviously very critical in your next few years to getting this off the ground as inclusive a process as possible. I think Denver provides a good example of that, and we're happy to share lessons learned. With that, I think I'll stop and turn it over to Mike.
Hey, we're the odd duck in this group. We're a relatively small city still, and we're adding only about 1,000 households a year. So pretty modest growth for Southeast standards. But growth is not the priority of the city, and it never has been. When our neighbors 100 years ago were moving to an orientation related to heavy manufacturing, Madison actually encouraged some of its industries to move out into other communities like Milwaukee. Like the other communities, a knowledge economy, a big research university, the largest research budget in the country, not devoted to military type research. That all went away in 1968 with our war protest. A convening center, it's an ag center. We're typically about 20th in the nation in ag produce, and it's really a city in a garden. And one thing that this shows is our student union terrace, where you can rent sailboats and kayaks. We're located between two large lakes. It is truly a unique setting. And those lakes are kind of monitors of water quality. We know when things are getting out of hand, and they're great fisheries, sports fishing, all year round. And we have trout streams coming into our lakes. So, I can literally get on my bike right about 5 minutes and go trout fishing from our downtown area, which is sweet. We also adopted a plan prior to embarking on the zoning project. That was the main emphasis of our ordinance, which was last tackled in 1964. And you can understand how it's very auto-oriented and suburban-oriented. Primary objectives were to protect our neighborhoods. As you go towards downtown, the neighborhoods get more expensive. And that's because we have a great downtown that people want to be able to walk to or ride their bike to all year round. Encourage mixed-use nodes, particularly in the old shopping center and strip development areas. Promote an active civic life on the streets. Enable choices related to mode, and focus both on sustainability and on urban design. It's Frank Lloyd Wright's hometown, and design is a big deal. We're 2 hours from Chicago, so architecture means a lot in Madison. Our biggest challenge was about managing public participation. The problem in Madison is too much participation on many issues, although we saw it as a real opportunity to learn some things. We have 21 members on our city council. Our county board reduced a while back from 103 members to 37. No bribes are going to take place on the county board. We have 125 incorporated neighborhood organizations and about another 75 that are less loosely organized. And all of those neighborhoods have expectations. And we're trying to combine this vital job center in a slow-growing community with environmental protection and protection of the quality of life. And these pictures from the protest from a couple years ago kind of shows what happens when the public isn't happy. These were 4 straight weekends in February and March, 10-degree temperatures. It was cold, and between 100 and 200,000 people out in the streets to express their dissatisfaction with government. So we wanted to stay away from that. Ours was that wasn't an accident. Our process was 5 years long, and we tackled the code first and adopted it with a delayed effective date, which was map adoption. That way, when we were coloring the map and looking at alternatives, we knew exactly what each of the colors meant. And that proved to be a wise decision.
See if I can balance all this. Good evening. I feel like I'm the sacrificial lamb here, both an elected official and I'm from Dallas. But anyway, I'm glad to be here in Austin and talk to you a little bit about our comprehensive plan Forward Dallas and some of the exciting things that we did and some of the challenging things. We'll start with the demographics. We are 1.2 million people. We cover 380 square miles. We're the 9th largest city in America, and we are a post-war car-centric city. We are an employment hub with a diverse economy and a strong bent to logistics, which can be evidenced by, oh, I went through your city. Really? Where did you go? DFW Airport. The city is 1.2 million, but we are part of a 6 million plus regional hub. And so we have to protect ourselves, if you will, and be competitive in a larger group. Like Austin, we were basically doubling our growth every 20 to 25 years, and we started falling off in the 1980s, then late 90s started to regain again. We have one of the largest, longest light rail systems in America, 91 miles, 55 stations. So in 2004, we began our comprehensive plan. I will remind you that up until that time, Dallas did not ever have a comprehensive plan. So we were really starting from our base. We were concerned about the following: being competitive in a competitive region. We had not planned for our light rail stations, whereas our suburban cities that had maybe 3 or 4 light rail stations had already done station area planning. We were suffering from teardowns in our residential neighborhoods at such a clip. We were listed on the 11 most endangered by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We had over 800 development districts, and we needed to change the conversation. And these kind of show you the development as the city. So Forward Dallas was there to move away from a piecemeal project of negotiations and debates, give predictability, this is what you're going to hear over and over tonight, predictability to the process, and moved us toward a discussion of how do we want to grow and what do we want to look like in the next 20, 50 years, et cetera, and in this stage of our life cycle. So we began that process. We had a council committee of 5, a steering committee of 75, 11 public meetings, 2 citywide meetings, newspaper inserts in both English and Spanish, and all assumed a bottoms-up approach. So when you were in those citywide meetings or when you were in those smaller meetings, you were not just sitting and listening to a presentation. You may have been sitting at a table sort of planning out what you thought, using building blocks, your area or certain parts of the city should look like. We started even before that with looking at a complete modeling and analysis of all our past plans, a modeling of what build-out would be with our current zoning codes, surveys of over 800 people about what they saw in Dallas's future, what were core values for them, why they lived in Dallas. And we took those surveys, those themes, that feedback from our public meetings and created building blocks, and those building blocks are what is used to create the map, which is kind of hard to read. I mean, you really have to get up there close to see what it is, but building blocks of different kinds of development. Those areas that are largely white, like Mitchell's, were residential. They weren't going to change. Those areas in different colors might have been everything from a Main Street district to transit-oriented development area, etc. And what kind of building blocks would we have in those areas? Over 2,000 people had participated in our community meetings. 800, I said, did surveys, so we felt like we were reaching to the public. We created the vision map that captured that input and the building blocks and so forth, and then adopted that map as to where we would go to start to do area plans and co-development. And it also drives your investment for the future, because you don't do planning in isolation. You do planning to affect virtually everything else you do. Your economic development, the protection of your natural resources, all of those things are a part of that process. We did protect our neighborhoods with something called we already had historic districts and conservation districts, but we did something called a neighborhood stabilization overlay. We did priority area plans and amendments for those plans, and those were areas, for instance, the University of North Texas was going to do a new satellite campus in Dallas. That's an important public and investment that you need to make a plan for. Around a new hospital district that was being built to ensure that that development looked like what people saw for the future, that it was walkable, that it had easy access to transit and all those kinds of things. We did form districts. So we have zoning codes, and I talked this afternoon when we were meeting with staff about layer after layer after layer of small residential codes, townhome codes, mixed-use codes, light commercial, light industrial, and so forth. But in some cases, we needed to create form districts, less about the use, every single use, and more about what it was going to look like. We did green building standards. We did parking amendments, reductions for transit proximity, automated parking, all those kinds of things. And the complete streets, people told us, we don't want just a wide street with a sidewalk that makes us feel uncomfortable. We want flowers, trees. We don't want to be walking up next to the street, all those things to create context-sensitive design. So we created a manual for that and then went through and put that into the bond program so those investments can be made in those areas that were building blocks that were mixed use. So those were the kinds of things that we did. I think what is really important for all of us as part of this is to see the visuals. If you're considering the changes, see what those visuals, how those changes will look visually. It's not enough for us as either elected officials, appointed officials, or city staff to talk to you about specific zoning codes or different kinds of codes. What does that look like on the land? What does that look like to you in your neighborhood? How does that change your neighborhood? And that gives you the ability to see your future and how you want to develop. Thank you.
Well, one more round for those great introductions to the four cities.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Ms. Panelist.
Can we turn the bright lights down and the audience lights up?
Well, they're taping it.
So we can see them.
They're taping it.
Do you see how powerful I am?
Is that why I can't see
And the panelists said, let there be light.
Everybody
And there
is
was light.
smiling.
Okay. Is everyone still awake?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Very much so. Again, we will be taking a combination of questions from the podium and from the audience, so please take advantage of either the index cards, the texting option. I know someone's already texted in a question, or we'll have some time in a little bit for folks to come to the microphone. Folks, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with a question that's a little bit self-interested because I do public engagement, but I am really curious to hear a little bit more about some of the opportunities and challenges associated with integrating the public into land development code rewrite. Mike, let me start with you because you had referenced in your introduction, actually in your biography, you worked with an 18-member stakeholder group as part of your process. As I mentioned, the city of Austin is going to have a similar group. As it relates to that and just generally trying to integrate the public, especially in a city like Madison, what did you learn about how to do that effectively?
Well, the first thing we learned is don't call the committee Z-Crack. Those of us on the committee started calling it Zacrack. I've been on Zacrack for 3 years, and I go to the meetings every month, and I just can't get off Zacrack.
We have places that can give you treatment for that.
So one thing that we learned is that we had a big outreach effort at the beginning where we went to each of the aldermanic districts, 21, and held a listening session, had maps and air photos out, and people could identify concerns or conflicts related to land use and the existing zoning districts. And our worry during the code process was never about getting enough participation. We had really good attendance at each of our meetings over the 5-year period. At the end of the process, when we did the map, we repeated that same outreach effort. We had a 3-hour drop-in session in each aldermanic district. And I think our attendance averaged about 200 persons at each of those meetings to review the draft maps. They could take 11 by 17s home. And at that meeting, we were really showing how the code was being upgraded to protect existing neighborhoods and encourage high-quality development in redevelopment areas.
Anyone else have sort of insights into what worked and didn't work in public involvement? Tina?
Yeah, I think one of the hallmarks that we're very proud of in Denver is the extent of the public engagement process. It started at the beginning with listening sessions. We have a council, area representation rather than at large. So we have
District,
13 council districts. So it was kind of relatively easy for us to figure once we had drafts, we had 13 council districts, we'd go to each of the 13 council districts and do the same workshop in each of the 13 every time a new draft came out. So we had 26 meetings, plus we did on demand. Anytime anyone called, we always said yes. On demand meetings in the space of 4 months as we got through drafts. So staff facilitated all those meetings. I think one of the key lessons learned from all that was that face-to-face time with the public to answer one-on-one questions that property owners had or developers had about how this would affect them, because everybody in the end wants to know, how does this affect me or my issue or my, or my pet project, to have that FaceTime and one-on-ones. We set up office hours, and people could drop by and ask questions, where we had, 10 staff members sitting at tables with our computers and a map, and we're able to answer questions like that. And we just rolled them through, 4 hours of office hours, and those were tremendous. I mean, we had the interactive website, we did mailings, we had a newsletter, but where we got the most bang for the buck is when we went out to the community and talked face-to-face with groups or individuals. So nothing beats that. And those same people were able to stand up before council, and even if they had a beef with particular parts of the code, because you're never going to make everybody happy about everything, they could all stand up uniformly and commend the process, that it was fair, it was open, it was transparent. They can see changes being made draft to draft in response to those comments, because that's critical. If you just listen and don't do anything, that's not really going to take you very far.
And Tina, did you typically go to other organizations' events, or did you?
Yeah, we were on the circuit. It was 24/7. We went to events on Saturdays, on Sundays, at 9 o'clock at night, at 6 o'clock in the morning. If you had a board meeting or a chamber breakfast, we were there.
And one thing that we did in front of, because we all do a lot of these public meetings, and we go out and we meet with folks, and we do the visuals, and we do the building blocks, and you sat at tables and envision it. But one thing that we did early on, at the very beginning of the process, was surveys. And those were like phone surveys or man-on-the-street interviews. What do you, John Q. Public, see? Because a lot of us that participate in these meetings, and I was a neighborhood activist before I was a council member, so I was a person who actually sat there during every briefing and went to everything. But there are a lot of people who don't participate, who won't come out. And so it was we called them, we showed up at the barber shop in South Dallas and asked them what they envisioned for their city, and used that input along with a participatory process. So you had some inkling of what folks might have want who may never be interested in going to a public meeting.
I'll be very brief, because I'm trying to limit our responses so we get more questions. We had the opposite effect. We had thousands participate in our planning process, and then it was just dozens or hundreds in our code process. I mean, people just didn't get the code. It didn't have the same attraction as the plan. That was planning policy, it was visioning, it was fun stuff. This is now code, writing text. How exciting is that? So we didn't really get the same participation. Our plan got 96% public support, and it was unanimously approved by council. And we identified the hot topics, so the public, when we asked them, said, look, you know the top issues, and so we just brought the hot topics to them to show them how it was being resolved, and we actually had to just go out to neighborhood meetings. Groups did form around specific interests, development communities and residents, and so it worked pretty well for us. We knew those hot topics. We did quick guides and fact sheets and presentations around those hot topics, and for us that seemed to work because the plan pretty much vetted all the key issues, and so it just made the process move a lot smoother. And it turned out that the exact hot topics we identified turned out to be the exact hot topics throughout the coding process. And so while hundreds only participated, we were able to resolve it, and everything worked well.
Thank you all for that. I just want to tell the audience that, unsurprisingly, you all are asking a number of fantastic questions, and I'm going to do my best to keep track of them. Here is 1/5 of them, and there's a nice organization of them here. So please forgive me if I don't get to every single question. I've got quite a few. Let me just real quickly ask a question that came in via text about public involvement. They asked how much of each city's plans required voter approval and was gaining support from citizens difficult. Was there any votes taken?
No voter approval
No
required.
City council.
Legislative governing body.
Yes.
Okay. Folks, affordability is a big topic in Austin, affordable housing and affordable quality of life. I think folks are generally interested in how the codes that you helped rewrite address it, but let me also cover a couple of specific questions. One was for Mike. You mentioned that neighborhoods are more expensive as you get closer to downtown. Did affordability or mixed income goals play into your codes? How have you each used your codes to promote development and preservation of affordable housing, both at 80 to 120% of MFI and then lower than that? And similar questions about how to use land development code rewrites for affordability.
I think Tina and I may agree on this point, and we have to be very careful to let plans and other processes do some of your work and not put all the pressure on your zoning code to solve all the problems. The code is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare and determine how your city is developed. Once you start injecting other things, you start to complicate the process. Now, we removed certain barriers in our code to make it easier to do development in the right places. We were very careful not to upset market conditions. There's just things that are, I think, subject to the market that play itself out. But what we try to do, as you saw from the map, is we targeted where places will be increased in land value, where the redevelopment would occur. Our goal was, by increasing the tax value and the tax base, the city took the initiative of raising funds through bonds to build that affordable housing and not put all that pressure on the development community. We felt it was a partnership if we wanted to do it and not put that burden on the code. We ran the numbers and found out it was very difficult in our market in Raleigh to actually require affordable housing. In North Carolina, it's illegal to mandate inclusionary zoning, which is affordable housing. So we are very focused on providing affordable housing, but we find other mechanisms. We have an affordable housing bond. We use our community development dollars, and we all actually purchase land, and we make sure we put the affordable housing in the right place. So I just caution you not to put your codes and do all the heavy burdens, but we lifted a number of barriers, and I'd like Tina to share what her city has done, because it's quite similar in terms of parking and other barriers which inhibits you from providing some of those affordable housing projects.
Keying off that, there are some things that zoning can address and can do well. In terms of variety of housing types and densities and intensities and choices. So in Denver's case, we did look carefully at our code to try to remove barriers that were embedded in the old code. For example, we had a minimum dwelling unit size of 600 square feet, and you think, well, that's pretty small, but we were getting some demand for smaller studio apartments that just couldn't be built, or single room occupancy type living, and those could not be built under that type of minimum standard. That went away. We did introduce accessory dwelling units into the code as a viable option across the city in certain zones. Those are the granny flats, mother-in-law apartments, those types of second dwelling units on a lot, with controls and limitations to make it still viable and compatible in character in a single-family neighborhood. Senior housing too. What we did across the board for certain types of housing for special populations, whether it's for homeless or lower income or seniors, was we cleared the path to making sure that minimum parking requirements were not going to get in the way of providing housing where households don't tend to have a lot of cars, that they do rely on other means of getting around the city. So our minimum parking requirements for those types of housing were reduced to bare minimums. And then, of course, we remapped our city. We did the text changes, but we also updated our zoning map, meaning we rezoned the 75% of the city of Denver. So we put those zone districts that allow those types of housing, or allows a mix of housing, or allows very high density housing next to our transit. And if you're going through these other mechanisms that Mitchell talked about, at least we cleared the path in terms of entitlements, so that someone who wants to build affordable housing doesn't have to go get a rezoning. I mean, they'll have to deal with a lot of other institutional challenges to get the land and everything else, but zoning was not going to be a barrier because we put the right zone in the right places to open the door.
We had required inclusionary zoning for 6 years, and it was an experiment that was constantly being tweaked, but in the end, it really didn't deliver the goods. In the new code, we've provided density and height bonuses if you hit certain levels and combinations of unit mix. We have eliminated most of our parking requirements throughout the city, including in the commercial districts. And that's another experiment. I'm not sure how that's necessarily going to
we've never required parking in our downtown district. Never. Like 50 years ago, never. And
well,
it's worked just fine.
So we don't require it now anywhere. That'll remove some barriers to affordable housing also. And we also enabled the accessory dwelling units in every residential district. But I think where the main bang for the buck is going to occur is in remaking our commercial districts from really kind of oriented only to sales and service to being true mixed-use districts. And I think, Mitchell, you mentioned that about Raleigh. We don't have any commercial or retail districts. They're all mixed-use districts. And I think that's where we don't have any neighbors now. So some of the NIMBY issues won't be present, at least at first, in those corridors. And we hope to really make good inroads in all parts of the city by focusing on those redevelopment corridors.
Let me actually stay with this notion of transition or mix of uses, because there have been a number of questions from the audience, and then there's some staff questions about transitioning from residential into commercial. How do you address that?
We actually, that was one of our super hot topics. I mean, super hot topics. We dealt with this on rezoning cases, case by case by case. We decided to put it up front, and there are several transitions adjacent to neighborhoods. If it's height, it transitions down. We gave a whole sky exposure plan for how that would work. We allowed for distance. The tighter it got, we had to put landscaping, fences. We just gave them a palette of options. So every project, commercial or high density adjacent to a single family neighborhood, must, mandatory, transition near a single family neighborhood up front. And we went out to all the neighborhoods. We actually took live projects and showed them how it would work. And once they saw it visually, as Veletta was saying, they bought into it. So now that is a part of our code. It goes into effect September 1st. And so that has been tested. It works. And so that is now a requirement for both commercial and high-density projects. Depending on the height, they have to either do it by width, or there are certain elements that have to go in or transition down to a very low height, 2 or 3 stories next to a single-family neighborhood.
And to some degree, that was we loaded in which we already had in some of our districts, was a residential proximity slope to ensure that it, as Mitch says, as you're moving through, that you're not overshadowing the residential property owner's backyard or those kinds of things. You are stair-stepping up, and that helps you transition. No light spillover. Those things need to be in your code. I come from Dallas, so you all know what we're doing with the Museum Tower and Nasher Sculpture Center. So,
just one quick follow-up. We had a tendency, when you have a weak code and don't know what to do, you rely on the overlay. And so our city was filled with more overlays we couldn't keep track. When it was a problem, what'd you do? An overlay. We were able to eliminate almost all of our overlays except 5 crucial overlays related to the environment, and we replaced them with these transitions. So the whole issue about the overlay, we said, here's what it is, folks. Right rules, right places. Tell us what are the common issues you want to fix. Let's put it in the code. Let's get away from the overlay addiction. And now we actually now have something with the transitions that actually work. And now the public sees it. We were able to wipe off almost all the overlays except 5 off the books that related to our watershed and other special areas.
Sort of related to transitions, there was a question from the audience about zone encroachment. So the example given here was a music venue. We have a few of those here in town. Staying open late with neighbors complaining about noise and traffic generated by commercial development. Anybody have code rewrite experience with that notion?
This is Austin. I thought you liked noise.
Yeah.
I live downtown and love it, but
okay.
Let's just say, hypothetically.
People move downtown for the action and say, no noise.
Yeah. We get that a lot.
Okay.
We addressed that in several different ways. One was the ordinance distinguishes between outdoor venues which amplify and ones that don't. Many of our great neighborhoods are adjacent to a small-scale arterial street, 48 feet wide, that have mixed uses in them. And it's an immediate transition. There's the back of those structures, an alley, and then the single-family neighborhood. And one of the ways we're getting at that is to try to use more of the street side of the building. So, for example, when it's not rush hour, take some of those parking spaces and use it for outdoor seating. And then we're using the building itself as the buffer, a very effective buffer in terms of lighting and noise. So that's been something we're just beginning to see the impacts of, but it's a win-win. The business gets the advertising of the outdoor venue right on the street, and the neighbors get the outdoor venue, another 150 feet away and on the other side of a building from them.
Yeah, Denver essentially does the same thing. Don't forget that, in zoning, you can regulate the shape of the building, where the building goes on the site, and that's kind of the form that you're regulating. But you've also got uses too, that you can regulate by use. And traditionally, zoning has always only dealt with uses, and we're moving to put more form regulations in, but don't you can still have use regulations. So you're not going to throw those out. And here's a perfect thing. This is a use issue. It's not so much the building and what it looks like. It's how that use generates impacts on surrounding properties. So you can have limits in your code that are specific to outdoor eating areas or outdoor entertainment areas. And you can, assuming your state hasn't preempted this in any way, you might be able to limit hours of business operation. You can limit lighting. You can limit and have to provide buffers. You can have a spacing requirement. And actually, our spacing requirement works well because, within 100 feet or 50 feet, if you're close enough to a residential zone district, you get kicked into a heightened review process. So all of a sudden you have more process to go through. But if you can put your outdoor patio on the front of the building, you can often get outside that distance trigger. And, people are incentivized in some way to avoid the process and the public review just by moving it to some place that's out of that distance. So it works pretty well.
Environmental concerns are big here in Austin. A couple of questions related to it. One is, how do the codes that you've worked on deal with impervious coverage, water quality, and retention? How do your codes address sustainability? And a question from the audience, how were ecosystem services engaged? In other words, the natural environmental flows that contribute to human settlement, were they brought to light in any city code development processes?
Madison's a natural step community. We were the second community in the upper Midwest to adopt that umbrella structure. And that's all about not concentrating poisons in the environment, and reuse, then think about recycling. And we've had a long tradition of progress in those areas. One new standard that we adopted countywide, it's a big county, 1,300 square miles, is a 95% stay-on rate for stormwater. And in the last 5 years, over half of the communities in the county, I think we're up to 37 out of 61 municipalities, have gone to a 100% stay-on rate. And boy, that's tough in an urban environment, not sending any more stormwater off-site than would naturally fall. So, structuring the stormwater detention areas underneath paved areas and underneath buildings is, in an urban environment, is really the only way you can do that, or combinations of using that rainwater from the roof for long-term irrigation or other secondary uses.
I'll do the best I can, because we usually have our stormwater engineers handle it part of the code, but I'll just do the best. That number one, we're governed by the North Carolina. Our code cannot be more restrictive than the state statutes. But just by way of an example, and I can't believe I just shut off my points here, we have watershed protection overlays, one of the overlays that I mentioned. Within our overlays, you cannot build commercial. It's just residential only, and right now, that's one of the issues we have there, and I believe the impervious limitation is 12% within the watershed. We also have nitrogen reduction. You could buy it down, but you have to meet in terms of how you're going to deal with all the nitrogen on your site. In terms of the watershed, again, we have both a primary and a secondary, and so we have cooperation within the county, because although part of it's in the city's jurisdiction, it's already also in the county's jurisdiction. But we have reservoirs. That's our primary drinking water supply. And so to ensure that we maintain both the quality and quantity of the water supply, we take our watersheds very seriously. Within the city of Raleigh, all development that exceeds 12,000 square feet of impervious surface, they must have a stormwater control permit. It's by a master plan. All of it has to be contained on site for the most part. And so in the city of Raleigh, we don't have regional detention facilities, which is somewhat, difficult for us, because the state also said they do not want to have regional stormwater for flood control. That's just what we have to deal with it. So most of that has to be retained on site. So sites tend to be a little bit larger. They can put them underground. We're now seeing cisterns and other ways, but for the most part, you do see these bioretention facilities open and on site. And that's something that we really didn't touch in the code because that was not part of the rewrite, but it's something we're now going to examine. So we do take it very seriously, both the quality and the quantity of our water and our environment in Raleigh. Sustainability is a different question, but I just want to touch on water.
I think the only thing I can add to some of this is we work very hard to preclude lot-to-lot drainage. And that was we can control a lot of the commercial aspects, but what we were seeing in redevelopment of residential properties where teardowns had occurred and then infill was put in, and then that was impacting from lot to lot. And that built into the code has preserved some of that. We don't do a lot built into our code on things like bioswales and all those kinds of things that we can look at for the future. We definitely have lots of green building code, but we don't have a lot other than, and all of us allow our stormwater guys to deal with it. So I know less about what they're doing in some cases.
Yeah, and we do not extend utilities into the watershed. Everything there is on well and septic. We do not extend utilities at all. The school district, I have to tell you, we're running out of land. They keep coming to us saying, boy, that watershed, look at all that vacant land. And so we've been able to hold it back, but we see things changing in our state, so we're not sure how long we can maintain that. There was recently in the county, a commercial project, quite a large one, a big box, that they were able to get that permitted, and they're using spraying fields. It was very controversial, but it got approved, and so we're all hoping that people will respect the watershed, because we were in a drought in December of 2007. I know you went through a drought. We had 60 days of water left. 60 days of water left for a major metropolitan area. So we take conservation seriously. It was a wake-up call, and so we hope that people remember that drought when they start thinking about putting development inside our watershed.
Let me shift gears, guys, a little bit to historic preservation. There was a question in the audience about whether or not any of you had use of a historic resource survey. There was a question about how Austin hasn't had one updated in quite some time. Can you just talk about how historic preservation may have impacted your rewrite?
Well, typically, historic preservation and zoning certainly have a lot of overlap, and they do touch each other, but historic preservation and the work program for historic preservation in the city is typically different than zoning. Like a historic building survey, that's to provide a baseline, so predominantly to be able to identify contributing structures in historic districts, but also to provide information at demolition of whether any type of historic property review should occur at the time that someone comes in and wants to demolish a structure. The only, and whoever asked that question, the city of Denver is just undertaking a citywide historic properties survey modeled after Los Angeles's successful project in that respect. One thing that the zoning can do is, when you have these layers of regulations in your community, which includes the zoning regulations, and then in a lot of places on top of zoning or in addition to zoning, you have historic preservation landmark districts. And so you've got your zoning book of rules and you have your landmark book of rules, and you really want to be conscious of any conflict points. So what we were seeing in Denver is that they were siloed and not really talking to each other. So poor person sometimes who owned a historic property would go through the landmark design review, which was difficult enough, and dot all their I's, cross all their T's, go back to the drawing board and redesign to get the Landmark Preservation Commission staff or the commission's approval for their design, and then go to our front counter to get zoning and building code approval and go, oh, well, that design that the Landmark Preservation Commission just spent 3 months with you to approve doesn't meet our zoning. It's too tall, it's too this, it's too that. Well, imagine the frustration, and certainly it wasn't happening a lot, but it was happening enough that one thing that we built into the zoning code was essentially a very serious nod to the importance and the validity of that very intensive design review that happens over here in Landmark. And if the Landmark puts you through essentially quite a lot of process and heavy detailed review, way more than our zoning can get to, that's good enough for zoning. So essentially, if there's any conflict when you get to zoning, we just essentially write it away and see to the fact that the Landmark Commission found you to be, your project, your addition, your expansion, to be compatible in a landmark district. That's going to be way more scrutiny than we can ever hope to achieve in zoning, where it's a more district-wide approach and not an individual property. So in terms of if you do bump into that, we have a very fast turnaround for resolution of those. Essentially, you ask for an adjustment based on the fact that you just got landmark review, an adjustment to the zoning standard that's in the way, and staff meets, and within 10 days or 14 days, you're generally okay. We just need to make sure that that landmark approval was given and that it meets all other zoning things, and you're on your way. We sign off on the site plan. We can do that.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I wasn't prepared for the question. We do have a local historic ordinance, and we have about 6 or 7 local historic districts. It's the only district in North Carolina you can actually have design guidelines. You can't have it anywhere else in North Carolina except for historic districts. So we have that. It works well. We have our Historic Districts Commission, but we created something called Historic District Light, and that's what I was looking up very quickly. I can't get all the components, but it doesn't require the same approach as our official local historic district, but it offers some of the features when an area is not designated, but you want to preserve. It's one of our new character overlay districts that you want to preserve that character. We're calling it Historic District Light, so it carries some of the features, but not the rigorous design guidelines you have to go through. So it's in our code. You can look it up. It's called Street Side Historic District Overlay if you want to find out more about it. So it's something that preserves the character and culture of the community. We feel is very important. And so there's 2 routes. One, if you want to have the fullest local historic district that actually retains the character of those buildings and have to go through a review process, or the Historic District Light.
That's LITE, right?
LITE.
So there's a free app.
Yes.
We do basically 3 layers of neighborhood protection, or that being what I talked about, neighborhood stabilization overlay, and that's really setback, the density, et cetera, just to keep it congruous. Then you go to the next level, which are conservation districts, which require staff review, not a landmark commission review. And I believe we have 12 of those in the city of Dallas. And then we have a number of historic districts that are neighborhoods, and then individual buildings that are neighborhood, that are landmarks. And then we have a fairly extensive tax incentive for both the residential to do their renovation as well as the big projects downtown, et cetera. So we do want to protect our character of these neighborhoods.
We have a simple approach. Any demolition requires a conditional use permit, which is public hearing and plan commission vote. And anything larger than a 4-unit residential building and all non-residential buildings go through our urban design commission, which is mostly architects and landscape architects, and both of those could be pretty brutal processes, and those were retained in the new code. The other thing our code does is we added a lot of new residential districts that really reflect the historic character of the neighborhoods. Our previous ordinance had one, 1964-like single-family residential district, and that one-size-fit-all approach made a lot of structures non-conforming. And so by diversifying, particularly our single-family districts, we really can reflect the character of the 100-year-old neighborhoods, which are the priciest.
Staying with price, there's a number of questions excuse me, about economic impact as it relates to all this work. One person asks, what did the city do to analyze the economic impact of the code changes proposed, particularly the dramatic changes? Another person asked, do you feel comfortable picking economic winners and losers by changing zoning?
We did do an economic development impact. I was showing a chart in the green room earlier, and you'd be overwhelmingly surprised how the tax base will be enhanced through our approach. I do not believe there will be winners and losers. The way we approached it, the neighborhoods remain unchanged. We see increased development, which in our opinion will help keep our property tax stable or low. In fact, North Carolina, Raleigh is one of the lowest tax municipalities in the state of North Carolina because we use something called return on investment in our planning. We look very carefully at the infrastructure we invest in and make sure we get a good rate of return so we're able to provide outstanding services and keep taxes low at the same time. We took an analysis of a map I showed you about the pink, and while I don't have all the hard numbers, actually it shows that it is financially successful, is going to be able to take care of its infrastructure, and so I'm very confident that it actually is a win-win for all residents, and I don't see the concern here about winners or losers. We're going further using a tool called Envision Tomorrow. Friggin' Easy came up with it. We're going to do further analysis to ensure to our council and citizens that this process works. So we did do the economic analysis, and in our opinion that this will certainly enhance and keep our city stronger in the long run. As you sprawl, time after time, you were showing that that is a waste of taxpayer money, that over time you have to maintain that infrastructure, and so it's smarter and better to start doing redevelopment where you have the infrastructure and where the return is better versus sprawling out your network where the cost is a lot higher.
Okay.
And I mean that.
Even though we're talking about land development codes, of course, transportation comes into play. There was a question about your city's goal for bicycles in a modal split. There was a question about how important was the fact that you had or didn't have multimodal transit before you rewrote your zoning codes. One person had a specific question for Mitchell about what transit vision you see if I-40 is to be improved and connectivity between the three cities in the Research Triangle. There was a question about the relative benefits of bus rapid transit and rail and how that affects growth and how plans would change if rail was not supported by the public. So lots of questions about the intersection between land development code and multimodal transportation there, folks.
Let me just hit a couple of highlights and then pass to my colleagues. We just finished our bicycle pedestrian plan. Our code now has required bicycle parking as part of our code. There's parking requirements for cars. We now have parking requirements for bicycles, including racks within parking decks. We want the infrastructure in place to promote the multimodal city. Secondly, you saw the chart earlier. We have a whole street typology that's encouraging multiple modes on our key corridors so that we'll promote many different modes. In terms of transit, I do not know how we're going to grow as a city without having a robust transit system. The choice, we cannot widen our thoroughfares, so the choice is people just have to be comfortable waiting in traffic and sitting longer, or we have to figure out ways of connecting. We're a polycentric city. We have growth centers throughout our city. We want to diversify our employment centers. I don't know how over time we can achieve that without having a robust transit network. So to me, the two of them go hand in hand. In terms of our regional transportation, there is a light rail system. 2 of the 3 counties had already passed a referendum, a sales tax for transit. My county, Wake County, is the only holdout. We need all 3 to move forward. Our county commissioners will not even put it on a ballot for the taxpayers to vote on it. I think the concern is they believe it'll win. So at this point, we're acting on faith, and we're developing that growth system that you saw with the belief that transit would come. You need transit to be competitive in the 21st century, period. Other cities will eclipse you if not, because the younger generation, the older generation, when people turn 65 and 70, they can't drive. The number right now is 600,000 people over the age of 70 stop driving every year. And if we live in an auto-centric society, we have to offer those choices for mobility for the young and for the old, and even for affordable housing. We want to make sure that we have access for jobs and housing, and transit's that key. So I'm very passionate about this, as you can hear, and our zoning code and plan is built with that in mind.
Denver has always seen the two things as fully integrated and complementary. Our transportation, our long-range plan on which our code is implementing is an integrated land use and transportation plan. We didn't separate out the two. Our land use recommendations are based on a street typology and expectations about transit. The City of Denver has recently, in the last decade, adopted a strategic transportation plan and a multimodal plan called Denver Moves, which you can see, and the emphasis is on, moving people, not cars. And that does put an emphasis on creating pathways for more bikeways, for more bike routes, and for bus rapid transit, and for streetcars, and for anything else we can think of and fund to move people easier and more efficiently through our city. There was a policy decision made that we will not widen city streets. Now, we have state highways and federal highways going through Denver. Those are a little more totally out of our control. But as far as our local and collector and arterial city streets, the policy is we will not widen. We will build new streets in our greenfield areas where there were no streets before, and everywhere else we'll build capacity by looking at modes. And our land development code, picks up on all those themes, makes the assumptions that we will implement these other plans in our capital investment program and our transit program regionally and locally. So it's all very much layered on top of each other, and where we put density and where we allow growth to occur is very much presumed on investments already made in transportation and investments to come.
We're about a year from going platinum as a bike city. 80% of all bike manufacturing is headquartered either in Madison or within 50 miles of Madison.
Wow.
We had the first bike sharing program that started over 30 years ago, and we're working with Trek to establish 75 bike stations throughout the city. I think about half of those are in place now. The requiring the bike parking is a good step, and eliminating parking requirements I hope is a good step. We do not have BRT, bus rapid transit, or light rail. I think that within the next 50 years, the need for light rail is going to be present, and the city is about to finalize hiring a consultant to look at a 50-year transportation plan. We have a city that's shaped like an hourglass between two lakes. We're the largest city in the country that does not have an elevated freeway coming into the downtown area. Those projects were killed in the early 1960s. So we have really an intact fabric of neighborhoods, and so we're set up to not be dependent on the car And I think that's definitely where we want to keep it.
I think for us, we're probably the best position from a mass transit standpoint, from a light rail, commuter rail. This week, our Dallas Area Rapid Transit did approve the streetcar funding, which will begin the construction from downtown to Oak Cliff for us with a new streetcar line. We're in the process of expanding into the Arts District our historic streetcar with a loop that will be able to take you from the light rail station to the light rail station, and lots of little centers along the way in our densest quarters, so in Uptown. And so you have all those. We are the least progressive, I will admit to you, regarding bicycles. I made a joke with the staff today. We're such a valet-centric city that we build huge homes and we valet from one side of the lot to the other. I am not kidding you in that.
Can you valet bikes?
What we are trying to do is move people in our plan and our codes is to move people closer to those transit stations. We've got 55 transit stations that we need to move a lot of people within a quarter mile of those stations. Then we have a massive bus network, and then you layer on that new streetcars that will come in the historic streetcar, and then making it a more walkable city, and a massive trail system for you to get on with your bike, doing more bike parking, for example, doing on-street cycling identification, and all those things. But I will admit we're the best at the mass transit here, and the worst at the bicycling.
I'm going to try and cover one more sort of specific question, or questions that are on specifics, and then get a couple of general ones, and then if we have folks that want to add their own. A question specifically for Veletta about the neighborhood stabilization overlay, to talk a little bit more about it.
Overlays, yes.
And these are basically, they are zoning, and then it keeps people from, if they're coming in and building new homes, from destroying the basic setback character of the neighborhood and of the height. So it's really about the lot coverage and about stabilizing what was the historic character of the neighborhood, not the design standards. So it's really to keep these hulking masses from being one next door, what I would call a gap tooth impact, where you've got one building out here, one back here, one over here, one back here, and it's to unify your setbacks and your heights and just that basic coverage. So anybody who comes in to rebuild on these lots goes through the process of making certain that they're not approved further into the setback, because these neighborhoods were built maybe, let's say, the 30s, 40s, 50s. And so the setback was much further than when we rezoned the land in the 80s, and we pushed the setback closer to the street in the 80s. And so those new houses that are coming in are pushing closer to the street, and what those neighborhoods really want is they want to keep what was the existing setback in the front and the existing height to some degree. And it doesn't have to go through a planning staff member as a new development occurs, or a landmark commission. It's simply going back through your building permitting process and making sure it complies with the old standards.
So we took a slightly different tack. Instead of an overlay, we just built that right into the base zoning. We were very specific, particularly in our single unit and 2 unit zone districts, that the sort of infill compatibility type of standard is already there. We require you, if you tear down a house, that you look to reference lots on the same side of the block as you, and you figure out where in the range of existing setbacks you're allowed to put your new house. We call it a block-sensitive setback. So instead of just I don't know why you needed to do another overlay, maybe because you didn't update those zone districts, but that was one thing you can do when you do kind of deal with all the zone districts at once in a comprehensive overlay. You can insert those things in so you're not layering actual zone districts on top of each other. It's just part of the expectation in the bottommost layer, the only layer.
And largely it was because in those, when we changed the code from when it was built to the 1980s, we are a property rights sensitive
You didn't want to
state.
change. You didn't want to
And
change
so
to go back to
certain
rezone.
neighborhoods want to push that redevelopment and push it up to the line, and others didn't. So we allowed that flexibility based on what the neighborhood wanted.
We adopted the Denver approach. We call it an infill compatibility standard. We had a lot of tear downs. Rather than doing an overlay, we did what Denver did. And anytime you're building a new home, you have to match up the setbacks. Your building wall cannot be that high, so you overwhelm the adjacent structure. And it goes straight to staff. You don't have to go through a long process. And so it just is built in. Anytime there is an infill lot situation, you just have to make sure you meet those infill compatibility standards. No overlay required.
A quick question for Mike and Madison about character zones. Can you share a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I think what all of our peer communities are talking about, they're a combination of form-based and architectural design, landscaping considerations, exterior building materials. Our 1964 zoning ordinance was form-based. We have 30-foot front yard setbacks and 10-foot side yard setbacks, and everybody was building ranch houses. That's the kind of neighborhood I live in, and it's about to become an historic district, because it's 50 years old now. So that makes somebody who's 55 like me feel a little uncomfortable.
We'd be happy to designate you historic.
But I think these character districts are really a hallmark of this of zoning codes done in the last 5 to 10 years.
One other question that came from staff has to do with the balance between strategically addressing certain priority issues first, but also having a comprehensive and cohesive approach overall, a balancing act between a code revision that addresses all issues but perhaps takes strategic aim. It may speak, Mitchell, to some of what you were talking about with the hot topics and how you went about choosing those and tackling those.
If you're going to go through that sort of root canal, just get it all done. I mean, if there's a hot topic and a problem, just go ahead and go through it. Just to let you know, as I said earlier, the code planning process identified the hot topics. We knew them. The diagnostic elevated those other issues. I can't say the strategic if you're going to go through the effort of going through a new code, which is a lot of brain surgery. Get it done with. I mean, do it right the first time. Otherwise, you're going to be ending up with revision after revision after revision. And so I'm not sure I understand the question about identifying the key issues and then being strategic. It is now the rules that are going to govern how things are going to be built. And I think you want to get them right, you want to be predictable, and do them up front. So that's my approach, and I feel it's just better to get it out there, talk about those issues. In terms of the only strategy we deployed is the same thing that was mentioned by Mike, is that we set an effective date after it was adopted so we can have a conversation with the community. The only other strategy we employed was that we looked specifically at those hot topics and engaged the public, but it's all important. When you do a code, you got to kind of do it all at once. I mean, our codes for the past 50 years have been piecemealed, right, and I think we see what the result is.
Well, can you maybe give us an example of how you framed or set up a particular hot topic, both for the public?
Well, I'll name some of the hot topics. We had accessory dwelling units, tree conservation, transitions, transparency. The developers weren't too happy about all the brick walls. We required transparency requirements, frontages, infrastructure sufficiency, shifting approvals from the Planning Commission and the City Council to staff, Board of Adjustment. So those things changed, very controversial.
Let me ask you
tear
this.
Downs.
How do you, let's say tear downs was the topic. Can you give me an example of how that would be framed for discussion?
Well, we identified the tear downs, and we hired actually an expert who I think all my colleagues know, to come into neighborhoods and start working out some of the solutions. We came up with, sounds like Denver's solution, was this infill compatibility. We found out what was a concern. We said, look, we don't want to do an overlay. Let's figure out another approach. And we came up with an approach. We sat down with the neighbors. We sketched it out. We took their block, their neighborhood, to say if this house was torn down, what would it look like? And it gave them a comfort level, and they said, we're fine. We kept testing it, and so that particular one no longer became a hot topic. It was checked. Let's move on to the next issue. And so we used the hot topics that were identified in the planning process, and we just worked through those solutions while the code writers kept working on the general body of the rest of the code.
You know, one challenge I think that all communities face in this process is on a regular basis through the code writing process, topics come up that are really planning topics, not zoning topics. And those tend to be dead ends without a happy resolution. And so we called it a parking lot, where these kind of proto-planning issues were taken out of the zoning process and put on a long-range agenda for the Plan Commission to look at.
But let me see if I get this straight. There are no parking requirements in Madison, but there is a parking lot.
I call it the bucket, but parking lot,
Bucket list,
basket.
parking list.
I can do that one better.
Cul-de-sac. We put them all in the cul-de-sac.
Can't escape.
We have 118 boards, commissions, and committees in Madison, and there are still waiting lists. But one of the objectives of the code was to give some insight into reducing the number of those boards, committees, and commissions. So we formed a new commission to do that. That was a quintessential Madison solution.
That's
Tina.
great. I mean, for us in Denver, yeah, I think we were more the approach. This is a comprehensive update. We will try to capture as much as we can, provided we had good policy direction. We weren't going to create policy and new plan direction through a zoning code update project. If it was something that had never been discussed in the city and had no political will or policy backing, we weren't going to force zoning to do that work. That's a planning process or a political process. So there were things that fell into that bucket. Some of that was solar access, for example. We made sure we did no harm in terms of where we were at. We weren't going to make anything worse than what it was. But in terms of going forward and guaranteeing solar access to every single family zone lot in Denver, we didn't have policy direction for that, and it was kind of counter to the whole growth management strategy of, you know, building denser things that are close together, closer into the city. You're not going to get sunlight in the middle of your living room when your neighbor is only 3 to 6 to 10 feet from you. So, you know, that was when we had to say, you know, we don't have policy direction, and you'll get a lot of that. And they're really sometimes very sexy, very compelling subject matter, but you have to have the discipline to say, you know, that's really fascinating, that's really interesting, but, you know, we don't have that political will, and we've got to keep moving forward. There was one substantive topic which everyone agreed our current code sucked. It was horrible. No one was pleased with the results. We can get everyone's agreement that we needed to change this part of our code, but we decided not to. Can anyone guess what that was?
Animals.
Not animals. Signs.
Oh.
Signs. Our sign code was, you know, 1970, 1972, somewhere in there. No one happy with it, but we couldn't take on that monstrosity and do the rest of the code at the same time. So that actually went on our bucket list, and we'll be doing it soon as its own track, its own project.
Let me put things in a stark context for you. Typically, you may do 2 major new master plans in your lifetime. A code, once. Jim Duncan is here. He'll tell you 1950s maybe was the last time, 60s you do a code. This is a once-in-a-lifetime generation opportunity for you, Austin. Yeah. It is. It's once in a lifetime, and so you want to make sure you get it right, and it will influence the next generation of your city for the next 50 years. That's probably when you're going to do another one, another 50 years. So those of you in the room, if you want to be around for another 50 years and do it, But I'm saying if you're going to do it right, because it'll last you another 50 years. I've been in the business as a consultant in private sector. I'm lucky we did the plan and code. It's not going to happen in Raleigh again in my lifetime while I'm there. So for some of you, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Ours was done in Raleigh in the 1950s. One before that was 1923. Our code was 32 pages. You could fit it in your jacket pocket. And great neighborhoods were developed. Look at some of your communities that were here in the 1920s and 30s. No zoning. So you have to think sometimes by adding all these layers and that complexity, we have to be very careful at what we do. But this is a generational opportunity for all of you in this room. So I urge you to take it very seriously, because you got one shot at this, and then you want to make sure it's not reformed and added over time, which is going to happen. But just make sure you start at a great base, at a great starting point, because this is one major shot that you have.
And I think it's important that we build into the plan a monitoring. So going back, you should go back maybe and revisit, and I'm not saying revisit the codes, but go back and look at in 3 years, these were the issues, this is how you dealt with them in the plan, this is how you did your code to deal with it. Are we meeting the demands, the expectations of those folks who are at the front end asking for those things, and to kind of monitor it as you go through? And you can set that time frame as 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is, but not looking back to see what you did and make sure. I mean, a lot of great American cities have plans sitting on shelves that are just plans sitting on shelves that we didn't do enough about. It's not enough to just keep creating plans. It's to follow it all the way through.
So I've got a couple of more, but if anybody wanted to come and directly ask the panel any questions, we'll have time for a couple of those. I think folks are hungry for results. They want to know what happened, what good has come from the rewrites of your land development code. Mitchell did speak a little bit to that earlier, but, you know, has zoning gotten easier? Is it less costly? Does it move faster? Are there quantifiable results? And also, I think people are curious about what hasn't worked in the wake of your rewrites.
Well, ours, the jury's out because ours was only passed about a week ago, but I can tell you the excitement from the development community and the public, the anticipation is very high. Developers already know they're going to save thousands, if not millions of dollars, which now saves you money in your pocket because they just passed the cost onto you of their cost of development. So we do know things will happen quicker. We do know neighbors will save a lot of time coming down to public hearings. Unless they just enjoy that, they can spend more time with their families or more productive things than to go down and fight for every little development project in their neighborhood. So we haven't seen it yet, but what it's going to deliver: better protection for neighborhoods, more infrastructure for bicycles, better predictability. People want this tomorrow because they know with our changing demographics, what's heading our way, a new lifestyle choices, they're now much more comfortable that we have a code that is going to address tomorrow. And my hope is that Austin's going to have a code and that they're ready for tomorrow, because the entire landscape about how we live, about our demographics, it's changing this country. We just want to make sure this code is ready for it. Our public, our developers are saying thank you. We now have the tools that are ready to plan and build for that future.
Well, we've had our code in place now for two and a half years, or a little over. In June, it'll be 3 years. And of course, it came online at a time that the economy in Denver was still very sluggish. So we've only really started seeing in the last year to 18 months a lot of projects coming out of the ground under the new code. But we can tell, just generally speaking, in terms of what's working well, creating a really solid framework and organizational approach to the code, grounded in those context differences and packaging things in a more graphically and highly visual way, organizing the information. Once the developers and owners get it, they get it. It's easier to use, it's easier to understand. We have a lot more language in there about why we're doing things and what we're aspiring to. So that's helped as well. So I guess our general approach seems to be holding up really well, and we've even been able to add on to it. Our former planning director, who was there as the code got adopted, his analogy was, you build a solid chassis. He was from Michigan, so and he was really into cars. So you build, a great chassis. Am I saying that word right?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
chassis. You get that solid. You make that baby be able to last forever. And that chassis could support a Pinto or it can support a Cadillac, but it's the same chassis. And, you'll figure out whether in the end, you'll get your Pinto or some mid-model or your Cadillac. You can try to aim for the Cadillac, but believe me, you probably won't get there. And hopefully, you won't be at the Pinto that explodes when hit. But you'll get somewhere, and as long as that chassis is solid and the approach is well, and you've thought about how you might integrate future changes in your code, whether it's a new zone district or a new building form or new uses, that you've got that chassis solidly built and it could incrementally improve and expand over time without some of the problems of the add-ons of the past that you had. So that chassis seems to be working really well in Denver. The other thing that's worked really well, and granted, this was really pushed by our business community who got very engaged towards the end of the project. Lesson learned, we should have tried harder to engage them more, even though the invitations were always put out. They didn't really show up to the table till our final draft. But they worked with us at that point very, very hard to look at a sort of reality check of our code. They were very scared of it. And we had great input from oil and gas industry, the guys who build your gas stations in the community, whether this code was going to work for the gas station on the corner. Our grocery store anchors, they finally arrived at the table late, but they are serious anchors in our communities. People rely on them. Could they build what they typically build under this zoning code? We called them the Business and Retail Working Group, and they, pushed back quite a bit at where we're headed, which was probably more toward the planner's utopian Cadillac version of a code, and pushed us back probably more towards the middle. But we built in a lot of flexibility as a result. It was the what ifs. Well, what if this? Or what if that? We finally started getting asked those kinds of questions by people who built things. And it's like we had to be able to answer those questions. So what we did is build in more safety valves. We said, okay, it's wonderful in a main street type of zone to get all the building to the street and build out that street wall, and it feels so comfortable for walkers, and it's an urban paradise. But when asked, well, what if you've got a really wide lot and you have a lot of frontage, but the building you want to build is only 50 feet wide and you've got 100 more feet of frontage? Are you going to make us build a false building that's 100 feet wide when we only want to use 50? Well, no, that's stupid. We don't want to do that all in the name of that's not good business, it's wasteful. So we had to start thinking about building in alternatives or exceptions or flexibility, and we did. And that's working really well. Now, you might not get the Cadillac out of the box, but incrementally we're going to get there. So if you don't have building wall for that whole 100-foot of Main Street, you'll have building wall for some percentage. And you know what? You could use a garden wall as well. You could build an arcade. You can do some other alternatives that we came up with. If you don't want to put glass for your transparency across your entire ground floor, we have alternatives. They meet the same intent, and that's key. And we kind of predefined those, so it wasn't just an open book and ask for anything and you can get, but we worked with our community to write that flexibility in. We have flexibility in uses. You come to us with a use that's not on our list because we didn't think of it, it didn't exist 2 years ago. We've got some flexibility without you having to go to City Council to get that list on the books through a staff administrator interpretation. So we've built in all these safety valves. A lot of planners were unhappy with the.
Let me just step in because I've got two people who want to jump in with questions.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's
we're a little bit short on time, so gentlemen, if you don't mind, and then we'll need to wrap things up in here in just a second.
Thank you.
Sure.
I live in a community that has a lot of children, and it's one of the defining characteristics of our neighborhood, and we want to try to preserve age diversity. But all of the housing, most of the housing that's getting built in our area is efficiency and one-bedroom units that don't work for families. I know some places like Vancouver have set requirements for family-friendly housing, but I also heard some of you also warn against overloading the zoning ordinances with a lot of requirements. And I think Tina Axelrod, you had said that you actually eliminated minimum standards for unit size. So what advice would you give a community like mine in terms of tools or approaches to preserve our age diversity?
Well, we found that the most successful approach, and we've got about 30 years of experience with this, is to address that issue right out of the blocks before the area starts developing, and set objectives related to the mix of housing types that are available, and reflecting the general mix in the community might be a baseline to start there. In terms of established neighborhoods, one of the issues that we were seeing in our newer neighborhoods is that the side yard setbacks in particular were almost always being maxed out. And we had this one-size-fits-all zoning district. And by going to more residential districts applied in a finer grain, we've been able to make a lot of the older non-conforming structures where they were a little bit over the side yard, you couldn't expand those under our previous code. So allowing for homes to be enlarged as families grow, I think is a very kind of simple policy decision, an easy policy decision to make. Now, how you combine that with the zoning code and protect neighborhood character is another issue. But in my experience, addressing that at the neighborhood planning stage is the most effective way to tackle that issue.
Sort of a broad question, but I hope you can provide a couple specific helpful hints to it. The struggle between single-family neighborhoods that have opportunity for serviceable businesses, bars, restaurants, cafes, laundry, newsstands, the battle between, or the struggle between those developers and those single-family neighborhoods that actually need those services but are reluctant to let them in, and how the code building could work in everyone's favor.
That's a planning issue. Yeah, we would have parked that one. Yeah. But again, in the mixed use corridors, there is some opportunity that isn't where you have more homogeneous zoning districts.
But we did in a couple of ways. In our future land use map, I agree with Mike, is that we laid out where those places could be located. In some cases, they were village centers or town centers and neighborhood centers where you saw in four corners or multiple corners where the commercial would take place. But we had conversations because we have a friendly relationship between developers. We don't have it's us against them, which is very often the case in many cities. And we try to figure out how can we grow together. And so the coding process allowed us to figure out where those commercial locations will take place, what is the level of intensity. Clearly, probably 3-story maximum would be the height limit of those locations, and then they would transition to the neighborhoods. But we have to give the developers, in some cases, enough density to actually make a project happen, but make sure there are transitions so that it doesn't overwhelm the neighborhoods in terms of parking and everything else that goes with it. So you actually can balance out the two. I think very often the no, 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 when you say no, there are consequences to say no. It's a very popular word you hear. And very often what we try to do is when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. You say no to rentals, you're saying yes, seniors, young people, we're not sure we want you here. You have to walk that delicate balance between the development community and some of the residences. And through zoning, you can find that balance of where it should be located, how the transition work, all those issues about amplified music and parking, and I think you can actually have that happy meeting.
So simple answer is transition area is the key.
To me, transition, parking, there are some touchstone issues in neighborhoods, which is, drive-through traffic, noise, and density. And if you can work out those issues in the zoning code, we did them through the parking, we did it through the amplified music by special permits, and we did it through the transitions, then we were able to reach an agreement.
Thank you.
Guys, I'm going to try and sneak in one last question, but we are nearly out of time. I do want to encourage everybody who's here to give us their feedback, telling us what they felt they learned from tonight that they want to apply when Austin starts revising our land development code. There's a feedback form, and you can also text as well. You use the phrase dev code to that same phone number, 22333, to answer that question for us if you'd like. But guys, last question just in the couple of minutes that we have is around trust building. How do you build trust amongst your public to participate in the land development code rewrite? There was a specific question about encouraging people of lower socioeconomic status groups not typically involved in processes like this. There was another question about ensuring that voices who may speak for preserving quality of life by limiting growth, how do they get heard? So how do you build trust and have an inclusive process?
We started with our comprehensive planning process, and it was very robust, very diverse, and we reached out to everyone. Because we had conversations about zoning issues, it was very easy to carry it over. Number two, we really emphasized to our elected officials, you have to be present, you have to show support for this process. There's always a concern that elected officials will sit on the sideline to see where the politics land and then kind of jump in, and it puts staff in an awkward position. I think it's very important that elected officials are out front and that they're showing how they support the process, that they're willing, as they hear issues, to address them up front so that they recognize that this is a partnership between the elected officials, staff, the residents, and businesses. But to me, the really hard work and evidence first starts with the planning process, where you build that relationship, and then really the coding process is part two. So I think it's a relationship between that, making sure that those elected officials and even key business leaders are showing support for this process as well. And I'd work very hard the early part of the process to make sure that they're engaged. And sometimes, yes, for communities of color and disadvantaged, those issues are very different. There's fears of gentrification that although those are planning issues, I think it's still important to meet people where they are and understand what is happening with the whole development process. And their issues may be very specific, but make sure those relationships you form in the planning process carry forward into the coding process.
I think for us, obviously, I think that having the elected officials engaged, those are the people who are closest to those communities. But I think it is also the use of the various modes of communication. There are certainly, our seniors may not drive at night. Some of our communities of color may get their news more through radio than they do through television, or we wanted to ensure that we translated and did our newspaper inserts, our radio shows, and those kinds of things in Spanish to ensure that we were reaching out. Your elected officials need to know the issues. The surveys that I talked about, part of that was we may have called someone who gave us some ideas, at least, who may not have showed up later and been part of it. But having all these different modes of speaking to people about what you're doing and reinforce your message and make certain that you take what the community is saying and make certain that you're incorporating what they are saying.
I think I need to leave it there. Will you all join me in thanking these four remarkable leaders? Well, it's been a pleasure moderating this conversation for you. We look forward to many more like it throughout the course of our process. There is a comparable event to this one tomorrow morning at 8 at St. David's Episcopal Church. And we invite you to stay tuned to the process at imagineaustin.net. On behalf of the city, have a good evening. Thank you all for being here.
I'm ready to move to